are now non-existent. And we need to truly do a cost-benefit analysis done to see if it is beneficial for the initial investment to be done, especially at the rate at which we tear down new schools and build new ones in their place. The incentives to produce what we need are no longer there at this current rate. Now, concerning convincing us, the world is a very hard group to sway to do things for the good of our health of our planet. It is focused on doing things that will keep their economies flowing and flourishing and give them the ability to get the most money that they can with the least amount of effort. This is a logical problem which we must solve for first, and even though we are having this plan that is solving for a problem that doesn't even exist yet. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Blackburn. This idea of a high-performance school where we use our own generated electricity, solar panels, or windmills, sounds like a good idea. Why is your team against this idea?
Because if we look at the main aspects of it, the member countries in the United Nations, which the main ones are the Great Eight or the G8 countries, which are the most industrialized nations, they are actually very hard to switch to new technologies because they're one of the main factors in producing many of the problems that we believe to be linked with global warming. And also the schools, we currently tear down and build new schools in their place at a rate so fast that even this initial investment would be wasteless because you're not getting enough lifetime out of the building to actually gain the benefits from it.
Thank you, sir. Our next speaker, representing the affirmative team, sophomore Derek Boland.
Okay, I'm just going to go straight down that's run. Starting with the problem. We cannot prove that global warming is not a continuous process because, as we've seen over the last couple of years, the ozone layers are continuing to open up, and as they open up, continuous heat is pouring in, and the world is continuously warming up. This can also be seen because the polar ice caps are currently melting all over the North Pole and South Pole, and should these melt, they could eventually create more problems in the future, along with the facts of burning up from global warming. So we can obviously see that global warming is going to continue to happen because pollution is what's causing these holes in the ozone layer, along with the climate change. So obviously global warming is a factor and we need to stop it through our plan. Moving to the actor. My opponent claims that the UN is not going to be able to enforce this around the world, but the UN should not even be able to enforce it in a large scale and other countries is the biggest polluters because my opponent said they were the most industrialized, which means they're using the most gas and pollution right now. So obviously they're releasing these huge amounts of carbon emissions, while Africa would be not releasing as nearly as much as the country of Europe, which would be the basis of the UN. So we can see the main polluters are actually involved in the UN, and therefore this plan being passed would have a greater effect. So moving into the action. My opponent claims that we won't be able to fund this plan because it's just going to be too expensive and the schools are going to be torn down too fast. But the plan only takes 1 or 2 years to pay itself off because alternate energy is reducing energy use and cost so much, plus the other added benefits that are involved with it. We can obviously see that the plan is going to be better because if it's paying itself off that quickly, then obviously it's a good plan. Moving into the benefits. My opponent claims that people aren't going to do this because they want to save money. But if they're going to save money by 50% or more, then they're obviously going to, especially because they aren't actually paying for this plan. As we stated, the government will actually be using 1% of their GDP to pay for this plan, and the schools will be actually doing this. So the people are actually going to save money through their taxes, and therefore the people would actually want this plan and not decline it. So now we can see how this is going to happen. The plan is, this plan of putting schools with high performance is obviously the best plan because it can spread it out like no other plan can and continue to force its way through, and eventually all of our generations will be run on alternative energy. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, your opponents claim that G8 nations and subsequent UN countries will not adopt your plan. My question to you is, If they refuse to adopt your plan, what will be the global consequences of that decision?
Basically, the global consequences will be the same things that's happening now. We'll continue to face global warming, and the main polluters will continue to pollute the air. So if it could continue, then we would eventually have all of our polar ice caps melted, and the effects of global warming could reach their whole.
Thank you, sir. Our next speaker, representing the negative team, Junior, Katie Carl.
The first thing we need to really examine is the problem, which is Section 1. And we need to realize that the mere notion of climate change being blamed on the human race is flawed. Because climate change, if to be blamed on anyone, would be Mother Nature. Because climate change is in fact a natural occurrence that occurs every 20 to 30 years, we need to realize that it's not the people's fault that we are in this problem. It's a natural thing, and it's going to happen. And the affirmative claims that global warming is not a repeating pattern, but is a continuous process. However, continuous processes, they usually do have repetition in them. So in the same notion, the problem that we are facing today is a problem where we faced 20 to 30 years ago. It's problems we face every single day of our lives. Looking at the second section of that of the actor, the United Nations is not the best to enforce the plan because the mere fact that the UN, number one, doesn't consist of the whole world, and the second flaw would be that the UN has no way of enforcing everything. Because if we did, then they would have everyone sign the Kyoto Protocol in the past years. And there's also no way to truly punish the violators and to ensure that every single country will go along with this plan. And that is the mere flaw, because whenever the Kyoto Protocol came up, many of the great polluting nations didn't sign it, and they weren't willing to sign it. And so looking at the action on Section 3, there is money needed to start the plan, and not all schools can afford to pay the starting cost. Whether or not, because schools that are in poor urban areas or even rural areas, they need a certain amount of money, and that 1% that the GDP is paying will not be enough if they have to start a brand new school with increased amount of funding to make sure to pay for every single extra cost in the way of making it energy efficient. And looking at the benefits, they are undeniable, yet they're not feasible. The world, especially right now, it runs off of economics. And if the benefits must be obtained by using more money than necessary, the large cost to initiate this plan will close off many people's ears. They'll decide not to do it just because of the great expenses at hand. And truly, this action plan to make new schools and to make them use alternative energy and to make them very efficient is not a good idea right now. Because what the world needs is focusing more on is fixing their economy. And if we are to take away more money than is necessary to make these schools more energy efficient, then it's going to turn people's ears off, because they want to be focusing on helping their economy problem rather than focusing on something that isn't even true or proven to be true.
Thank you, Ms. Carl. My question to you is, you keep arguing this economy. Why is fixing our economy, or the world's economy, more important than building these new schools?
Because if we don't have the economy fixed, then people won't be able to purchase and pay for these new schools, because if the economy is bad, then they'll have no way to implement and ensure that people in poor areas are going to be even to pay for and help continue on these schools.
Our next speaker, representing the affirmative team, Senior Jacob Hutchinson.
I will be arguing all of these comments and arguments in the same order that they were presented in. First, we start with the problem. My opponents want you to believe that global warming, climate change, climate shift, whatever you want to call it, doesn't exist, that it's part of a natural cycle. But this is a blatant lie. Global warming does exist. If you look at what we know that carbon dioxide causes this in greenhouse gases. And what have we been producing more of in these past couple decades? Carbon dioxide. We are clearly what's to blame for this problem, and we need to